Our gospel lesson comes from John's Gospel, chapter 12, verses 20 through 33. Now, among those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Then Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. Whoever serves me, the Father will honor. Now my soul is troubled, and what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it is for this reason that I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." The crowd standing there heard it and said that it was thunder. Others said, "An angel has spoken to him." Jesus answered, "This voice has come for your sake, not mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to indicate the kind of death he was to die. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I have a friend who pastors a church in North Carolina, in Mount Olive, North Carolina. He lives in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And over the past number of years, he's become very close to the Catholic priest there in that town. And he goes to weekday morning mass on a regular basis because he says the liturgy and the scriptures and the presence of being there in the sanctuary in the morning is very meaningful to him. It's helpful in his journey. And he was telling a group of us that not too long ago he had gone to mass early in the morning, and on his way in he had noticed a man sitting in the back pew. The sanctuary wasn't really all that full. And then as the service was coming to a conclusion and he started to walk back out of the sanctuary, he saw the man was leaning over the pew and holding his hands and just sobbing as hard as he had ever seen anyone sob. And he started to walk past him, and he thought, well, maybe he needs help in some way. Maybe I should stop and ask. And so he, as unobtrusively as possible, went into the pew and sat down next to the gentleman who just continued to sob. And he said to him, "Sir, can I help you? Is there anything wrong?" And the man, sobbing, looked up toward the front of the sanctuary, where obviously there was a big cross, and in the Catholic Church is a crucifix there in the front. And the man said, as he was sobbing, "Have you ever seen anything so beautiful?" And then he turned and looked at Bob and he said, "Have you ever seen anything so beautiful?" Bob was a bit taken aback, and he looked toward the front of the sanctuary and toward the cross and realized he was being invited to see in a new way and to see through this man's eyes as he looked at the cross there in the sanctuary. So much so that it brought him to tears. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful? John tells us that some Greeks come and say to Philip, We want to see Jesus. And then Philip goes and gets Andrew, and apparently tells Andrew, and they both go and see Jesus. And tell Jesus that the Greeks are there and asking to see them. But Jesus, instead of saying, do they have an appointment? Or instead of saying, well, yes, bring them on in, Jesus launches into this long discourse about all sorts of things, which in some ways we may wonder what they have at all to do with the request of the Greeks to meet him, to see him. And yet when we read Jesus' response and hear these words over and over again, we know that these words, like is so often the case in John's gospel, are all just drenched with a kind of significance. Seeing is one of the key words in John's gospel right from the very beginning. And when the Greeks come up and ask Philip and say to him, sir, we would like to see Jesus, it reminds us how at the very beginning of the gospel, when John the Baptist pointed out Jesus, those that he pointed him out to came up to Jesus and said, Rabbi, where are you staying? And Jesus turned and responded to them, come and see. And then at the very beginning of the gospel, it's Philip, after he has been called by Jesus to follow him, goes and tells Nathanael about Jesus. And Nathanael says, well, what in the world good can come out of Nazareth? And Philip says, well, come and see. And we are reminded how that phrase and how the use of the word see happens so many times in John's gospel, even up into the Easter story, where John and Peter are running to the tomb on Easter morning, and when they get there, they look down and bend in, and it says that Peter looks in and sees the grave clothes where Jesus had laid. But then it says that John looks in and sees and believes. The word see is used at so many different times and in so many different ways, but it's just so often translated see when we read it in our text. Sometimes it can mean simply, well, look here, take note of that. Do you see that object? But other times it's used with this sense of, do you get the point? Do you understand what's happening? Can this move you? Can this change you? Can this engage you? And when the Greeks come and say to Philip, sir, we would see Jesus, it's that word in John's gospel in the Greek that they're using. It's the word that was used to describe John the disciples' seeing of the grave clothes in the tomb and believing. It's as though the Greeks are saying, we want to see, we want to understand, we want to know what all of this is about. They don't come up and say, show us where Jesus is. We just want to wave to him like a celebrity in the crowd. No, they're saying, we want to get the point of what's going on. And then Jesus' response to the disciples takes this form. Well, if you want to see, you're going to have to watch what happens in the days ahead. You're going to have to watch now my journey to the cross. You're going to have to watch as I move towards this moment of glory, which is going to be a moment of suffering, Jesus said. You're going to have to watch if you want to see. You're going to have to watch as I'm lifted up for the whole world to see. And we begin to understand, and we're reminded how this movement of Jesus toward the cross, he understands how it is a moment of his being lifted up for the whole world to see and come to an understanding of what's going on, for the whole world to be able to see God's willingness and God's compassion to be a part of this life of Jesus, and through Jesus a part of our lives. And if you aren't willing to keep going and look up and see the cross and what is happening to Jesus there, well, then Jesus seems to be saying, you won't really get the point at all. Do you want to see Jesus? Do you really want to get the point of what's going on? Jesus seems to give us two clues in this section of John's gospel. He says that it's like a grain that's dropped into the soil, a single grain, it begins to disintegrate. And through that action, through its being alone and being in the earth, it brings forth a great bounty of grain and wheat for the whole world. And it's as though Jesus is saying, we're coming to a point here, we're coming to a place where as you watch me, if you want to know what's going on, you're going to have to begin to understand how it is my life now is opening up a possibility, a reality for the whole world as I give it in the act of God's love. And he expresses it as though it's a kind of crisis moment, a kind of a point in time which is cutting across our lives and almost demanding that we see something here. If you want to see this, you're going to have to see it in its broadest possible context. If you want to get Jesus, then you have to get what God is doing through Jesus for everybody, not just for a few, not just for the in crowd, not just for those who say they understand, but for the whole world. That's what's at the point of breaking forth. And then Jesus goes on to say, where I am, there my servant will be also. Where I am, there my disciples will be also. And it's as though he's saying, if you want to see this, if you want to get the point, if you want to understand, you're going to have to be involved in this as well. If you're going to follow me, if you're going to be my servant, then sooner or later, you're going to be where I am as well. Sooner or later, your life is going to get caught up in this action and activity of God to which I'm giving my life, whereby your life in some way, as mine, will become a gift to the world. Your life, as you seek to make Christ life and light visible in it. Do you get? Do you see what that means for us? We're not going to be able to understand Jesus just by talking about him. We're only going to see it when our own lives begin to be lived out in the light of his life, to the sound of the rhythm of his life, to the pattern in which he gives his life. We're only going to see, we're only going to get it, we're only going to understand when we're willing to be where he is. And so here we are about to begin our journey into Holy Week. And we're going to be challenged to see as much as we can about what is going on, to see what God is doing for the world. And we're going to be invited for our lives to become a part of that, to find expression in that as we give more and more and more of ourselves away to the work and the love of God which Christ shared with all. Can you see it? Can you see it? Amen.